as you can see, our key topics today, or what we expect from this webinar, is the learning outcome should be, we should be able to distinguish the different tasks, activities needed to deploy a new mobile network, discuss the techniques and methods of project management in rolling out a new cellular platform, example, this new O-RAN environment. And we should be able to design and implement an effective network management monitoring system for maintenance and capacity planning, which would really be important in case you will be the project engineer of that project and you will have to turn everything to operations. Let me, oops, sorry. Okay. So these are our objectives for the day. So we need to have a basic understanding of the project management principles, especially in deploying an Open RAN system. We should be able to share tools and techniques of formal project management that can be used also in our daily tasks and other projects aside from our technical projects that we will be encountering in rolling out a mobile network. And then, of course, lastly, as mentioned by our facilitator also today, that it's very important that we are able to maintain our environment after we have deployed or completed the project. So by now, I think you have attended a lot of seminar about O-RAN. And by now, you should be familiar with at least on the O-RAN architecture. And as you can see, the O-RAN architecture is very complex, from the end user equipment, from the cellular sites that they're going to use, up to the front haul, to the core of their network, to your data center, and even to your backhaul, right? It's going to be a very complex deployment because of the nature of the platform. It's very complex, and you will be at least dealing with 5 or 6 vendors maybe when you're doing the integration for the whole architecture. So having said that, what do you think would be a good principle in managing all of this? So you need to have a good project management skill, right? So if you are just an engineer, maybe straight from the university, or maybe just 1 or 2 years experience in the field, you don't have the skills yet, right? What you normally do is dive in directly to the technical skills, and you are asked to, install the equipment, maintain it, and everything. But as you grow into the organization, you have to develop your project management skill. And one of the candidates, of course, in an O-RAN deployment, it will be very complex. As you can see from the below diagram, from start to finish, it would be a lot of major activities, right? So if you have a lot of major activities, beneath that activities are sub-tasks or major tasks that you will have to implement for each major activity of the deployment. So right now, what I'm going to refer to as a good management practice, a project management practice for everyone, is go to your Project Management Institute guide. They have a very good documentation on project management. And you can also visit their website at www.pmi.org. The reference, and which I also use for this presentation, is the PM book. That's the Project Management Knowledge Areas, 7th edition. So most of the lectures that I'll be presenting today comes from this organization and from the documentation that they normally publish, which in this case is the PM book. So what is a project, right? So a project is a temporary endeavor undertaking to create a unique product, service, or result. In this case, our unique service would be ORAN, or mobile network connectivity, which we will normally offer to the public, right? So when you see a project, it should be a temporary undertaking. What do I mean by a temporary? When you say that a project or a project comes to you, normally you have a beginning and it should end, right? Uh, a project could be a long duration, it could be short duration, but at least it should have a beginning and an end. So there's no such thing as an ongoing project. For example, if you guys would be assigned to deploy an ORAN network, right? Somewhere you have to finish the project, close it, and turn it over to operations. After that, the project should be closed. It should cease to exist, right? All those concerns about maintaining it, or if there's a fault after you have completed the project, it should be under operations already. So a different team should be handling that. So please remember this. A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique service or result. So in our case, since we are dealing with ORAN, it's a very complex, right? So it can involve multiple projects, right? So when I say multiple projects, so the deployment of an ORAN platform will be a program. So when I say it's a program, there will be so many projects under that program, and those related projects will have to be completed in parallel or maybe one after another, but the ultimate goal is the objective of the program, and that is to deploy an optimized and efficient ORAN environment. So what is the project life cycle of any project? So these are the 5 basic project phases. Initiating, someone has to, your business sponsor or maybe a major stakeholder is planning to, put up his own mobile network. So that would be his concept, right? And in the initiation phase, he needs to write down all the requirements that he needs for this new mobile platform. After the initiation phase, that's the time when most of the stakeholders comes to the table and plan what will they do next, right? And after the planning stage and documenting everything in the planning stage, then they will go to the execution phase. But in between planning and execution phase, so that you will have a successful execution, you have to monitor and control the variables when you're doing the project. Those variables we will discuss later on. Once you have done your execution, as I've said, a project is temporary. It should have an ending. So once the full project has been completed, maybe up to the last bolt that has to be installed, then you have to gather again all the stakeholders and you will have to agree to close the project. So that's the complete life cycle of the project. So it's initiation, planning, execution, and then closing. And in between, you have to control it and monitor it for, of course, if there are issues along the way. So as I've said, you can refer to the PM book guide, and there are knowledge areas in that PM book guide for every major area that you have any doubts on how to implement it. For example, how you can gather scope, how you can manage the time of a project, how to produce or come up with a good costing of any project, how you would implement quality on each document that you are going to produce for this project, and of course, HR management, because HR would be the one that you have to go to if you will have to require resources that will be under this project. And the next one is communication management. Sometimes this is not being taken seriously. But remember, as the project goes along, you have to publish status reports, right? And you should have a communication plan on how to publish that status report. And the next one is risk management. As you implement the project, there are going to be risks involved in it. For example, if you procure items that are required in the project, there are instances that the procured materials would be delayed because there will be supply chain issues, right? For example, during the pandemic, what happened? All of the materials that are being imported in from Europe or US has limitations because the pandemic has stopped most of the manufacturing at their major plants. And the next area would be procurement management, which of course you have to speak to your procurement team or buyers, as we call them in the corporate organization, because they will be the ones securing the contracts and issuing POs to your vendors. And the last area, which is really important, is the project integration area, because this is where all the things that you will have to do and manage the vendors and contractors that will be involved in your project. So all of this you will encounter within the phases of your project. During the phase of the project, you will encounter all of these knowledge areas. So when doing project management, normally there are three major constraints, right? That will always be there that you need to address. Most of the time, you will have limitations in time because the project schedule might be too aggressive. You can also have some issues with your scope because sometimes the scope that was initially published will have to be changed because the requirements have changed. Maybe, for example, the area that a mobile network will serve was previously conceptualized as only part of Luzon, but later on, the owner might have decided, oh no, we will have to also cover parts of Visayas or something like that. So scope can change, right? And then the most glaring constraint that we normally encounter in doing a project are resources. Sometimes you will always have limitations in your deployment, especially engineers, technicians, and even project managers, right? So you have to make a balance out of these three major constraints. So you have to watch out for the time, your schedule, the scope, the cost, and then of course, your resources. And by the way, all of these triple constraints is a primary responsibility of the PM that's assigned to it, including the project engineers. So we have already discussed the cycle of doing a project, right? So we have the initiating, which is to clarify the requests and objectives. So here you will have to define the requirements thoroughly. And then you will go to the planning phase. Here you will have to develop the specific approach on how you're going to deploy the project. For example, are you going to do it in phases? Are you going to do a pilot before you do the rollout? So these are all the things that you have to discuss during the planning stage. And then, of course, in the execution, this is normally monitoring and controlling. So most of the tasks that will be done in rolling out your project will have to be monitored if they are within schedule, and you have to take action if there are some major delays. And once the execution phase is done or the full deployment is completed, then everybody or all the major stakeholders have to sit together and review and agree that the project is already completed and you will have to close it. And all expectations have been met based on the defined requirements during your planning. And of course, during closing, you also need to document all the lessons that you have learned during the project deployment. So what are some of the struggles often experienced by major practitioners of doing projects? Most of the time it's about the scope requirements, right? So when we do the scope for any given project, we really need to spend some time to review the project requirements because all of the requirements should be included in the scope. For example, how many cell sites you are going to deploy, how many servers are you going to deploy, which areas are going to be covered. So this is a continuous review before you publish the document and agree that this is the only scope of our project. Otherwise, if you will not have a good scoping of your project or getting the requirements of your project, you will struggle implementing your project because the scope will always change. So it's like, when you're doing programming in a computer, garbage in, garbage out, right? So in the initial phase of your project, you should be able to nail down the scope of the project. So as I've said, you need to clarify the requests. What are the requirements, the initiative that they want to implement? When we say initiative, it's the goal or the objective of the project. Next, you have to make sure that every major stakeholder is involved in the project, even the smallest or maybe the least recognized business sponsor. And as I've shown in the diagram, there's a microscope. You need to do clarification all the time to define the requirements. So these are the major things that you have to watch out during your initiation phase. So after you have defined the requirements and come up with the draft of the plan, the first major document that you will have to circle around to your stakeholders is what we call a project charter. So the project charter defines the high-level scope, all of those other items that will have to be excluded in the scope, the objectives, milestones, and timeline. As you can see, you should be careful that this is high level. So when you say high level, the project's charter is like a draft, right? This is not yet, if I will, have an analogy with a contract, this is a contract which is not notarized by the lawyer, right? Because this is a draft. But at least you have something to start on. The project charter is something that the stakeholders, if they see this document, will authorize that the project is already valid and legitimate, and you can start with the project. So normally this is circulated around as a memo and an email notifying everybody that the project is already alive. And we already have an agreement on the scope, high-level scope, objectives, milestones, and timelines. So who are the project stakeholders? So people or groups positively or negatively affected by the project are all stakeholders, right? So as you can see, it comes from a diverse group of people, like, for example, your legal team can be a stakeholder. External vendors can be a stakeholder. Department heads will be a stakeholder. Your senior leadership are stakeholders. Staff can be stakeholders. And of course, the whole project team are stakeholders. Sorry for the pause. As we have said, the project stakeholders comes from a diverse group of individuals and people. All those that have influence over the project, either directly or indirectly. So in order to have a good understanding of your stakeholders, what I do is I produce a stakeholder matrix, right? So I clearly define or put in a table who all of the major stakeholders are. And of course, what are their titles, which department or organization they belong to, and I normally categorize them. For example, if they are a member of a project team, or they are the owner, or they are a vendor, I clearly define all of my stakeholders. Actually, I even classify them if they have a high impact or medium impact to the project. So even the influence that they bring into the project, I normally put categorization so that I will understand. For example, if there's a conflict in the project, who would be the most influential of all that I need to satisfy? Okay? And it's also important to have your stakeholder matrix, because when you do the status report, you will have to include each and every stakeholders that needs to have on the status of the project. So the requirements document is just an appendix also of the project charter. The major document that you have to produce is the project charter, the high-level contract, right, that we have mentioned. But I specified here a requirements document that should be attached or should be an appendix to the project charter, so that there would be no other things that will be left behind in defining the requirements, because the requirements list is already the outline of your scope, right? So if you miss a requirement, you chances are you will also miss the scope of the project. So a good practice is to list down all of the requirements of your project and have a requirements document that will be an appendix of the project charter. So this is an iterative process, right? You have to, for example, this is your initial list, and then you will have to go back to your stakeholders again. Is this correct? Am I correct that these are only the requirements that we need? maybe they will have some comments, right? And then you will have to come up with an updated list again. So it's a constant cycle that you have to be regularly reviewing with your major stakeholders. So as I mentioned, I'm putting emphasis on the requirements because the initiation is really, or the planning would not be accurate if you have not clearly defined your requirements. So as you can see here, I've shown a diagram again of the architecture of your ORAN network. And there are so many things that you will have to list down, right? And come up with each and every requirement for each segment of the architecture. So for example, your distributed unit, your central unit, right? Radio unit, you will have to define all requirements for each major category of the architecture. So if you need to produce some memo just to clear the requirements, right? Please do so. As I've said, for me, as a practitioner of project management, I normally produce a stakeholder matrix. So it's just like a table. And then I will come up with my requirements document that I normally attach as an appendix to my project charter. So always have a handy microscope so that you will see if you have missed anything. So the project charter normally will have these major items: the project objective, your high-level timeline, the specific roles and responsibilities of the project team, including the stakeholders, of course, stakeholder matrix, and the most important is to define the project requirements. And as you can see in the last item, this serves as a contract so that the project is already authorized to start and move along because all of the major stakeholders have already agreed to the high level scope of the project. So as you can see, this is a typical example. So a project charter can be a one-pager or maybe 5 or 10 pages, depending on the appendix that you need to attach to it. But basically, what I'm showing you are the most important contents of a project charter. So in the project charter, you should have at least the project title, the start and end date of your project, the project manager who's handling the project, or in some cases, they are called program managers because of the size of the project. And then, of course, your sponsor. Then you will identify or put into the charter at least the objective, right? And then you will have to put the initial scope. And under that initial scope, what are the deliverables? You should also be able to identify the risks and issues and the assumptions that you will have to publish as well. For example, if there are limitations in the terrain and you cannot deploy cell sites in that area, you have to provide those assumptions. And of course, the financials, the initial cost of the project, and then the high-level schedule. So we're done with the project charter. But this is how you organize the plan before the project is authorized, right? So normally you will have during your initiation phase, you will have a kickoff meeting. You will have an organization and plan for it. Determine all the tasks or major activities that needs to be done. You should create a high-level schedule. And also included in the project charter is how you're going to communicate or maybe publish status reports as a draft, right? And you will have to create the project charter document. Okay. Any questions so far? Any clarifications before I move on to the formal project management plan? Anyone in the chat? Any questions so far? There's a question here. How different is PMBOK 7 versus PMBOK 6? They are updates, I think, especially in the HR management area. So that's the difference. Okay, so I will just move along. So the next document that we will have to produce is the project management plan. So that once you're done with the project charter, right? So as I've said, the project charter is just an initial contract. It's a contract that is not notarized by the lawyer. That's what I call them. But you have the go signal to go ahead with the project because you already have the project charter and you have already published it to your stakeholders. Now, the next step is really to produce the real contract. And that is what we call in project management lifecycle, the project plan. So this is the next document that you will have to produce. Now, what is inside the project plan? The project plan is basically very similar to your project charter. But this time, the project plan is already refined, right? All of the high-level planning, scoping, scheduling will not be high-level anymore. Once you go to the project plan, those high-level scheduling and costing will have to be the final one. And every schedule should be detailed, right? So each and every major activity, tasks, and sub-tasks will now have to be included in your project schedule. So that's the major difference of a project charter to your project plan. So the project plan, if I will again use my analogy in a contract, the project plan is a contract that is already notarized. This is the real thing. So once you turn over the project to your stakeholders or to operations, what they will look at is the project plan. If all the requirements in the project plan were served or not. Otherwise, they will not accept your project as completed. So the project information that will be included in your project plan is already the specific scope and objectives, the final stakeholders and contacts, the final requirements, right? As I've said, you normally go over your list of requirements, right? But this time, once it's already in the project plan, that's it, right? There should be no more changes, if possible, in the requirements. Otherwise, your project will be never ending. Now, your schedule should always be updated as well, but this time up to the granular tasks and subtasks. And then in your scheduling, you have to publish milestones. Milestones are specific markers in the project schedule that have to be met. And then, of course, the deliverables that are included in that milestone. Milestone are just markers, like specific dates. But included in the marker should be the objective, what has been accomplished during that date. That's why milestone and deliverables come together. But milestones are just markers, major markers in your schedule. And then you should also be aware of the issues that have transpired when you're going to the execution phase, and you should be mindful of that because it will also be included in your project plan. But normally the things that are included in the project plan are the risk issues normally comes when you do the execution phase already. The other thing that we need to be careful with our project is we need to have a central location for all our documents. So nowadays it's very easy, right? We have a shared drive or a shared portal wherein all of the information concerning a project or a major program are all uploaded there. So it depends on you if which stakeholder you will have or grant access to it as a viewer, or for example, if you're part of the project team, you can have edit rights so that you can what do you call this, edit the requirements or the updates of the reports. But it depends on the people that will have that rights. So this is also a living document because the updates can come in later. So all of our templates should also be placed in the shared drive and all the historical artifacts. So when you do the planning, as I've said previously, in your project plan, this is the real thing, right? All of your major activities you have to do in a project will now be in a what you call this, a granular form, because the task will have to be breakdown into subtasks, right? And in project management, the tasks and the subtasks that we define, we normally call them work breakdown structure. So work breakdown structure is just another term for the tasks and subtasks under each major activity. As you can see here, the project here is a website. So each major activity is defined as a work breakdown structure up to the subtask. So once you have defined all the tasks or you have completed your work breakdown structure, you are now ready to come up with your formal project schedule or your final project schedule. Remember, in the project charter, what we do is a high-level project schedule. Once you have your project plan, this is it, right? The project schedule should be should include all the tasks that will have to be done to complete the project. So you should list all of the tasks. And normally we have a tool for it that we use in project management, right? The Microsoft Project. But in most cases, they also use Smartsheet, right? But what's important is to list each major activity and divide them to tasks and subtasks so that you can clearly define the duration of each major activity, each major task, each subtask, and when you total all of them, you will come up with your full schedule or the final project schedule that you have to put in your project plan. So this is how I do it, right? I normally come up with the task list, and each task list has a resource person assigned to it. And then you will have to define the start and finish of each task so that you can come up with once you add all of them, you can come up with the complete project schedule. So this is what we call the the work breakdown structure work packages. So once you're done with your complete or adding all of your work breakdown structure or tasks, then you can come up with a schedule. So this is how it looks like, right? So if you have a Gantt chart, a simple Gantt chart, you will be able to define how many weeks is a major activity, and then you can publish them in parallel with each other so that you will clearly see which major activity or tasks are overlapping with each other, or which task is dependent on which task, right? So you can clearly line them up, and you can have a schedule in weeks, but normally it's also in days, and you will have a clear picture of the whole duration of the project. So this is what I was mentioning to you earlier. As you can see, if you will see in this diagram, there is a symbol that is like a diamond here. Let me place my cursor, right? So when you have something like that, that is a milestone. So there is a specific date that you need to target, or maybe a date that is very significant that you will have to complete a major activity during that date. So those icons, or which are diamond shape, are milestones. And this is the project schedule that you will have to put in your project plan. So let me pause for a while. So maybe what I can show you is an example of a project plan. Let me just open my sample of a project plan. So me let me share again my screen. I think I have stopped sharing my presentation. So are you seeing my screen now? Okay, so this is just to show you how a project plan looks like. So as you can see here, the project plan includes the goals and objectives, the scope, your assumptions, the risks and constraints are also there, and of course the project management approach and all the attachments And the most important thing in a project management plan is the sign off of all the stakeholders, especially the major ones. And normally it's in the last page. Even the responsibilities are also included in your project plan. So as you can see here, you will place all the stakeholders and they will have to sign off on the project plan. So once the project plan is already signed, there should be no more changes to the requirements or to the scope of your project because you already agreed to it. Okay, so let me share my presentation again. So, okay. So at least you have an idea now of how a project plan looks like, a formal document of your project management cycle. So the next item that we have to discuss under the project management plan, of course, is the project scheduling, right? So when doing the work breakdown structure plan, then you will complete it, of course, and then you will complete your scheduling, right? So it will look like this. If you're using Microsoft Project, which I normally use in the corporate world, right? So once you're done with your project scheduling, it will look like something like this. So the Microsoft Project normally computes the critical path already. But for you guys, you need to understand the concept of a critical path. So in order to understand this thoroughly, the previous name of the CPM or critical path method during the early days of project management, when there was still no formal project management concept, is what we call program evaluation and review technique, or PERT, right? So this is something that the US Navy have used in the early 40s or 50s in doing a project for their intercontinental ballistic missile, right? So they came up with this in order to come up with a critical path. Nowadays, we call it CPM, the critical path method. So what is a critical path? It's the longest sequence of activities that must be finished in order to complete your project. So in order for us to understand this, I think I'll stop sharing and maybe share a video on how a critical path and PERT looks like. So let me share my screen again, but this time I'll share a video with regards to this concept. Wait. Okay. Let me share my screen again.
Kelly tells us that he attributes the origin of the term critical path method to a competing methodology, the program evaluation and review technique, PERT method, that had been developed at around the time by Booz Allen Hamilton and the US Navy. These two methodologies are very similar. They use overlapping approaches, but represent information in a different way. Indeed, the roots of the critical path method go back before the 1950s into the 1940s, where they were used with some success on the Manhattan Project. Of the two, the PERT method and the critical path method, it's the PERT method that is falling into less use these days. The primary difference is the PERT method shows activities on arrows with nodes to represent how the activities connect to one another. The critical path method, on the other hand, shows activities as nodes, usually represented by boxes, with arrows to show the logical links between them. The other principal difference between the PERT and critical path methods is that the PERT method uses 3-point estimates for the durations of activities, whereas the critical path method more simply just takes a single point estimate. To apply the critical path method, we take a simple 6-step process. In step 1, we specify each activity, and we usually draw these from our work breakdown structure. In step 2, we start to sequence the activities by understanding the dependencies that link one activity to the next. This enables us, in step 3, to draw our network diagram. This is a graphical representation that uses arrows to connect the activities, which are shown as boxes. And in the boxes, we can record the information that is important to us. The next step, step 4, is to estimate how long each activity will take, the durations. And as I say, in the critical path method, traditionally they're single point estimates, which is both the strength because of the simplicity, but also the weakness because of the lack of recognition of contingency and variability of the critical path method. The 5th step is to identify the critical path, and the critical path is the longest route through the network. It's critical because any extension to the duration of an activity because of a delay will necessarily lengthen the critical path and therefore delay completion of the project. And finally, step 6 is to use your critical path as a monitoring tool as well as a planning tool, and to update it to show progress. So the critical path is the longest route through the network, but we also calculate the earliest and the latest possible start times for activities. These enable us to understand where we have float, the ability to vary the start time of an activity without affecting the completion of our project. Float is sometimes known colloquially by project managers as slack in the plan. Of course, a project can have more than one critical path. Indeed, if every route through the network is the same duration, one could argue that the project has been optimized. There is maximal risk, however, all resources are being fully deployed. Note, however, that if you have parallel paths through the network, you can only make this work if you have the resource flexibility to ensure that resources are deployed according to your plan. So the critical path method is a really strong way to understand the logic of your project and a great way to calculate the duration. But I have to say that these days, far more project managers prefer the Gantt chart. But the truth is that a Gantt chart and a critical path network diagram are siblings. They are simply two different representations of the same information. And high-end project plan depth take a beta from the Gantt chart. The critical path method then is just one way to plan, display and track the progress.
So I hope you now understand that PERT and CPM are just two different representations, but more or less they are the same. So if you have already have a project schedule, for example, if you're using already MS Project, it will already compute the critical path automatically. There's another video which explains how to compute for your critical path, but in the, you know, I think we need to finish on time. So I'll just refer you to the video so that you will have a better understanding of how to compute the critical path. Okay. So for me, I also normally have a communication plan, right? So as I've said earlier, normally I have a stakeholder matrix, right? So all of my major sponsors and all of the resources that are included in the project team, I keep a matrix or a list of all of them, so that when I do a communication plan or a status report, all of them should be included in that status report. So the communication plan this time is something that will be an attachment or an appendix to your project plan, which is your true contract with your stakeholders. So here you can identify the stakeholders that needs to be notified, and you can come up with the communication matrix. So the project plan, as we have mentioned, what's important is to have a work breakdown structure or list down all of the tasks. And once you come up with a complete task list, you can come up with your schedule. And then you will produce your communication plan on who needs to be updated during the progress of the project. So once the project plan is signed off, right, we now go to the execution phase. And during the execution phase, of course, it will not be always smooth. There will be some hiccups during the implementation, and there will be issues that will happen during the course of the project. And this time, you will have to take note of all those issues and list, and you will come up with the action items for each of the issues that are encountered in the execution of your project. So you will have something like this, an action and issue register. So you will have a date when it should be addressed, right? So you will also classify the priority of those issues or risks that needs to be addressed. This is like a logbook of all the issues and action items. And as I've mentioned, in your communication plan, and that's part of your communication plan is your status report, which should also be attached as an appendix to your project plan on how you will do your status report. So as you can see here, this is the basic of a project status report. You should have a description of what project you're publishing, the timelines, the progress, the deadlines, the issues, and of course the next steps or action items that needs to be done during each phase of the project, or as the project progresses, weekly, monthly, after 3 months. So you will have to publish a status report for each of those durations. So as you can see, this is a major undertaking of a project engineer or project manager of updating the stakeholders of your project. So during your execution, these are the things that you will have to produce: the action issues register, and of course the status report. By the way, as I've said earlier, when we produce the project plan, that the project plan is your binding contract with your stakeholders, right? So basically what I'm saying is the requirements that are listed in your project plan are the things that you will have to deliver. And once the project plan is signed off by the stakeholders, there should be no changes. But in the real world, it doesn't happen, right? normally changes happen. But that process is beyond the scope of this webinar. You have to attend the full course of my uh, the full course of the IORA Academy, which in that course, I will have to discuss how to manage changes in scope. And that will be another story. So now once we're done with the execution phase, we all the things that were published in your project plan, we already executed and then completed most of the major tasks in the project. We now come to the closing phase, right? So this is where we will have to review if all the requirements that were published in your project plan have been met. And in this review, you will have to discuss what went right and what went wrong. And after the final review, you will come up with the lessons learned on what happened when we implemented this project or program. So as you can see, for me, I normally come up with the lessons learned document. And this is also published to my stakeholders so that this will be an important document that will be captured and put into the repository as something that PMs that will be doing other projects in the future can look at, so that they will have a better understanding if it's a similar project of what went wrong and what went right during the course of a specific program. And then once you are done with the final review, we have to close the project, right? And in the corporate world, we normally have a project approval document or a closing document. So once all the requirements are met and we are ready to turn over the project to operations, each major stakeholder and each of the project team will have to sign off to the document, the closing document. And this will be the document that tells everybody that the project is already finished and done. So it's already closed. So as we have said earlier, the project is just temporary and it should have a beginning and an end. And then the final review, of course, will include each and every comment on the lessons learned. And all of these things would be included in your project approval document. So in summary, we have discussed all of this: the definition of the project life cycle, the project management function, the triple constraints. And we have defined the major stages of the project: initiation, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and then closing. So maybe we will now go to the part 2 of this webinar, which is how to maintain and monitor our infrastructure after we have turned over the project to operations. I've seen a lot of questions in the chat. Sir Richard, can we address this later on?
Yes, sir. We'll answer the question in the Q&A portion of the seminar, of the webinar.
Okay, so if you will allow me, I'll just continue.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now we go to the maintenance and capacity planning stage of our webinar. So it's now operations, right? As you can see, again, I've shown a complex automation call flow of an ORAN environment. So it's really difficult to monitor each and every equipment, right? So in the course of part 2 of the webinar, what we're going to discuss are the tools that we can rely on in order to complete our end-to-end functional testing, so that when we turn over our project or deployment to the operations, everything is already smooth. They will have no more questions, right? Because everything was tested. So in order to do that, we need to understand that we cannot do it manually, right? We need to have a certain automated tool to monitor and do fault finding in our network. So in optimizing the network that will turn over, normally everybody would be concerned about the overall performance or optimization of the network. Normally it's about bandwidth, right? And then our tool should have network forensics so that it can drill down to the root cause of specific issues in each segment of our network that causes latency, jitter, and maybe poor voice and video. And nowadays, the users or operations are demanding, right? They will have to look at the quality of service of each component of your architecture, and they will look at those services if they're being fulfilled or not. And how do you do that? Of course, you will need an automated tool or a monitoring tool so that they will be able to identify if you're meeting the requirement. And lastly, the consumers are now really becoming more demanding, right? So now we have another key performance item that is being measured, which is known as the quality of experience. So the quality of experience aims to show how the service quality is experienced subjectively by a user, right? So this is now the user telling the operator or the mobile network or the carrier that you have a poor service because my experience is not that good. So let me share a video what I mean about how optimization of a network is being done using automated tools. Let me I'll stop sharing first.
One of the best ways to prevent and mitigate bandwidth hogs and traffic spikes that impact a business is to identify them proactively and resolve them before they have a chance to wreak havoc. Monitoring network traffic is the most efficient way for network admins to understand underlying issues in the network. You can help admins pinpoint the exact cause and location of the problem with in-depth visibility into who or which application is using how much bandwidth and for what. Apart from aiding in identification and troubleshooting of network issues, network traffic monitoring also provides admins with historical data that they can use to improve their IT infrastructure, network health, and performance in numerous ways. ManageEngine NetFlow Analyzer provides real-time network traffic and bandwidth utilization monitoring. Here are 5 things that you can do with this network traffic analyzer to better manage your network. Identify top talkers. Track top talkers and conversations in your network with source IP, destination IP, port, and protocol. NetFlow Analyzer uses network behavior analysis to provide a comprehensive view into network traffic and gain insights into devices, interfaces, apps, and users. It helps identify which applications and users are consuming the most bandwidth by tracking and analyzing network traffic in real time. Generate custom reports. NetFlow Analyzer monitors and collects network traffic data to generate, schedule, and export in-depth reports in just a few clicks. These reports help with analyzing bandwidth to give better insights into the network and to identify and troubleshoot network issues. Get notified in real time. Threshold violations and traffic can prove fatal to a network's health if left unnoticed. NetFlow Analyzer lets you set highly customizable threshold-based alerts to get notified when utilization or network traffic exceeds the given threshold or when there is no traffic flow. Diagnose network security threats. With its advanced security analytics module, NetFlow Analyzer offers continuous network security monitoring. It helps analyze network traffic trends to identify anomalous network traffic activities and security threats like DDoS and zero-day attacks and troubleshoot them. Shape network traffic. With its traffic shaping features such as service policy and access control list, NetFlow Analyzer helps you set, validate, and reconfigure quality of service policies. It helps you block or restrict bandwidth hogs and ensure the priority of your mission-critical applications. NetFlow Analyzer offers deep visibility with support for multi-vendor devices, technologies, and flow protocols like Cisco NetFlow, Juniper JFlow, NBAR, CBQOS, WLC, IPSLA, Huawei NetStream, IPFix, and more. Better monitor and analyze your network traffic with ManageEngine NetFlow Analyzer. To learn more and get a hands-on experience with a free 30-day trial, visit
So as you can see, there are tools available already in the market that we can readily use, right? So if I go back to my presentation, so the most important thing that we need to understand is that when we turn over the network to operations, when we turn over our network to operations, what's important to them is that you have done a complete end-to-end testing, right? So when we are doing that, we need an automated tool for us to do it, right? So what I'm saying is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? There are tools available out there that are capable of doing the end-to-end testing of the whole network. As you can see, in an Open RAN system, the functional testing will start with the radio and end up with your core network, right? It's end-to-end. Operations will not accept your project once it's completed if you have not done this end-to-end testing. So there are good solutions already out there that we can use, right? Maybe coming from Viavi, NetScout, And all of these things are readily available to us. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So before I complete my webinar, maybe we can take a look at how Viavi Solutions does the end-to-end testing using their system.
EANTC is a member of the i14YLab consortium. As an independent test lab and consultancy, we have co-hosted 3 joint TIP and O-RAN Alliance interoperability plugfests so far. In the i14YLab in Berlin, we validate multi-vendor interoperability, performance, scalability, manageability, and security aspects of Open RAN solutions. Specifically, we focus on end-to-end solutions based on O-RAN Alliance standards. The scenario showcased here is a quite complex end-to-end test setup. Enabled by Viavi as the test tool provider, we emulated user equipment and 5G core, creating a bracket test around the disaggregated solutions from Node Edge and Acceleran, forming the radio unit, distributed unit, and centralized unit in the O-RAN reference standard. The successful test proved that the F1 interface between the centralized and distributed units is multi-vendor ready, supporting key 5G radio functionality. Our ENTC team was able to execute the test efficiently with the help of the Viavi TM500 UE emulator and the Viavi TerraVM 5G core emulator.
We were glad to have the joint European O-RAN Alliance and TIP Plugfest Fall 2022 at the i14YLab in Berlin. The i14YLab is a community effort of 11 partners wanting to accelerate time to market for disaggregated components like O-RAN. We believe that to make O-RAN a reality, we need to work together and define a common ground. Great progress was made during the Plugfest, as you will see in a moment. And this shows that we can be confident that together we can make this work.
O-RAN Alliance Fall Plugfest 2022 showcased the end-to-end testing and automation in an O-RAN multi-vendor environment. This partnership proves the value of O-RAN testing and automation, showing that automation is helping to drive efficiency and how cost-effective test solutions are vital to minimizing risk in deployment, ultimately saving costly redeployment. This demonstration showcase is helping to troubleshoot performance issues remotely in the lab before deploying in the field. The setup will focus on demoing end-to-end performance and functional testing using the EANTC automation framework, the Viavi TM500 network tester for UE emulation, the Node Edge ORU and ODU, the Acceleran OCU, and the Viavi TerraVM core emulator.
So the Node Edge is being used here in connection with the Acceleran CU and RIC in order to show full data rates against the Viavi TM500. The Node Edge low-cost combined DU-RU provides an O-RAN experience in a robust and fully featured cell.
Here you can see the dashboard of our CU UP and CU-CP implementation together with the functionality of the RIC that you can see, for instance, on the left in the bottom part for the XApps deployments. So our CU is a cloud-native application, so we don't need to turn it on or off. It is server-like, always active, and as soon as we turned on the Node Edge cell, it automatically connected to the CU that made the link to the core and activated the radio. And these Wi-Fi symbols that you see, they indicate that basically all systems are up and running, and the cell is now ready to receive UE connectivity from the TM500 simulator.
We have already our core up and running. So this is our core from Viavi, and it's been up and running and it's connected to CU. We are using the Viavi TM500 as our UE emulator in this scenario. we have multiple campaigns created here, and these campaigns will be kickstart using ENTC Test Orchestrator. ENTC Test Orchestrator aims to ensure continuous testing in a vendor-neutral environment by automating as many OpenRAM defined test cases as possible. This way, the interoperability solution will be tested efficiently and accurately in minimum amount of time, closing the gap towards production readiness of OpenRAM technology. For now, we do offer end-to-end functional and performance suite.
This is where we run the test cases. Firstly, add the test run, example end-to-end scenario, and then you can add each of the test cases. Then run those test cases, and you can see the progress of them running in the progress bar. As you can see here, all 3 test cases have been run, executed and passed. You can then go to show results and see the results of the test cases one by one. This demonstration was successful in the remote and automated validation of end-to-end interoperability with a split 2 multi-vendor scenario between Node H, RU and DU and the Acceleran OCU ORAN solution, benefiting the telecoms industry by supplying pre-integrated remote solution for rapid lab and deployment on an online network, validating remote integration in the i14Y lab with zero touch on-site vendor support.
As part of the upcoming work in the i14Y lab, we are now preparing for the next ORAN Alliance Spring Plugfest. Multi-vendor radio optimization using RIGs and XZEPs RFs will be one of the major focus areas. Throughout this year, our plan is to move to continuous automated testing and to onboard multiple TIP and ORAN Alliance certification schemes.
Viavi offers the most comprehensive test suite on the market for lab validation of ORAN networks, with vast experience validating network products for operators and manufacturers worldwide. Viavi allows testing of any node, ORU, ODU, OCU, RIC and core, and complete end-to-end testing to be performed on-premise, in the cloud or as a service. Our end-to-end 5G portfolio can support our customers through the Open RAN development cycle, from functional to performance testing.
So as you can see, if you will be able to select the correct partner or the correct maintenance tools that can be used in your end-to-end testing, these network monitoring tools are already complete with machine learning and AI themselves. So what I'm saying is that once you have these monitoring tools, those tools are not just for monitoring. They will be also be responsible for the self-optimization of your end-to-end network, because they are already equipped with machine learning and AI. So they could already do the actual configuration of your radio beams. They can do the network slicing using self-optimization because you have selected the correct network monitoring platform. And it will be able to predict failure on the and degradation of the equipment for the whole end-to-end network. And that would, provide a good user experience and for everyone that is subscribed to your network. And it will also enhance the security of your mobile network.